Good evening, and welcome to Truth Report. I'm Alex Truth, and tonight we're pulling back the curtain on stories that connect in ways you might not expect. From Singapore cracking down on mystery toy boxes to Uber betting $100 million on a future without human drivers, the through line is the same: corporations engineering consumer behavior, and governments scrambling to keep up.
I'm Maya Clarity, and we've got a loaded show tonight. We're covering Singapore's bold move to regulate the blind box craze that's sweeping Asia, the escalating Rohingya militant threat that Southeast Asian governments keep ignoring, Porsche's cold feet on electric vehicles while Audi doubles down, and Uber's massive bet on Robotaxi charging infrastructure. For stories, one theme: who's really in control?
Let's not waste any time. We start tonight in Singapore, where the government is doing something almost no other country has attempted. They're going after the blind box industry. And if you don't know what blind boxes are, that's part of the problem. Your kids probably do.
And your wallet definitely does. Let's get into it.
So here's what's happening. Singapore's Ministry of Digital Development and Information has proposed new regulations targeting blind boxes, those sealed packages of toys and collectibles where you don't know what you're getting until after you've paid. According to reporting from the South China Morning Post, the proposed rules would ban the sale of blind boxes to minors under 16 and require companies to clearly disclose the odds of getting specific items. Think of it like putting nutrition labels on gambling.
And let's be clear about the scale of this market. We're not talking about some niche hobby. PopMart, the Chinese company that dominates this space, reported revenues exceeding 6 billion yuan in recent years. Their stores are everywhere across Southeast Asia, in shopping malls, airports, tourist districts. They went public on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, and their valuation skyrocketed. This is a massive, sophisticated industry built on one psychological principle: the uncertainty of what's inside the box.
The South China Morning Post spoke with Faye Jimeno, a 33-year-old creative executive in Singapore who's been buying blind boxes weekly since 2021. She described them as compact, relatively affordable, and easy to purchase on a whim. And that phrase right there, easy to purchase on a whim, is exactly what regulators are worried about. These products are engineered for impulse buying. The packaging, the mystery, the collectability, the social media unboxing culture, it's all designed to bypass rational decision-making.
And here's where it gets really interesting from a regulatory standpoint. Singapore's approach draws direct parallels to gambling regulation. When you buy a blind box, you're essentially placing a bet. You pay a fixed price, and you receive a random reward of varying value. Some figures in these collections are common, worth exactly what you paid. Others are rare, worth 10 or 20 times the retail price on secondary markets. The odds of getting those rare figures can be as low as 1 in 200. Sound familiar? It should. That's a slot machine with better aesthetics.
Now the industry pushback has been predictable. Trade groups and collectors have called Singapore's proposed regulations paternalistic. They argue that blind boxes are just toys, that collecting is a hobby, and that the government has no business telling adults what they can and can't buy. One industry representative compared it to regulating trading cards, which have operated on the same mystery model for decades.
But that comparison actually undermines their argument, Alex, because trading cards are increasingly regulated too. Several countries in Europe and parts of Australia have started treating loot boxes in video games, which operate on the exact same random reward mechanism, as a form of gambling. Belgium banned them outright. The Netherlands took legal action against Electronic Arts. Singapore is simply extending that same logic from the digital world to the physical one.
And let's talk about who this really affects. The South China Morning Post report highlights that a significant portion of blind box buyers are young people and teenagers. The products are deliberately marketed with cute, collectible designs that appeal to younger demographics. PopMart's Molly and Demo characters aren't targeting 40-year-old investment bankers. They're targeting teens and young adults who are most susceptible to variable ratio reinforcement schedules. That's the psychology term for the same reward mechanism that makes slot machines addictive.
The deeper issue here is that the blind box industry represents a broader corporate strategy we're seeing across sectors: gamification of consumption. Companies have figured out that if you add an element of chance to a purchase, people buy more. It's not about the product anymore. It's about the dopamine hit of the reveal. And when you engineer that experience for maximum addictiveness and then market it to young people, at some point it stops being commerce and starts being exploitation.
Singapore deserves credit for being willing to have this conversation. The proposed regulations aren't a ban. They're disclosure requirements and age restrictions. That's the bare minimum of consumer protection. If your business model can't survive consumers knowing the actual odds of getting what they want, then your business model is the problem.
And watch this space, because where Singapore goes, other Southeast Asian nations often follow. Malaysia, Thailand, and the Philippines all have booming blind box markets and virtually zero regulation. The question isn't whether this regulation is paternalistic. The question is why it took this long.
Now we shift to a far more serious story unfolding across Southeast Asia. The Rohingya crisis, which most of the world has conveniently forgotten about, is evolving into something that security analysts are warning could destabilize the entire region. The Diplomat is reporting on the growing Rohingya militant threat, and the picture they paint is deeply alarming.
Let's set the context for viewers who may not have followed this closely. The Rohingya are a Muslim minority group from Myanmar's Rakhine state. In 2017, the Myanmar military launched what the United Nations called a textbook example of ethnic cleansing, driving more than 700,000 Rohingya into neighboring Bangladesh. They've been living in refugee camps in Cox's Bazar ever since, the largest refugee settlement in the world, housing roughly 1 million people in conditions that are, by any humanitarian standard, catastrophic.
And here's what the Diplomat's reporting makes clear: the refugee crisis in Bangladesh is, in their words, steadily metastasizing into a transnational ecosystem of criminality, militancy, and corruption. After nearly a decade in overcrowded, underfunded camps with no legal right to work, no access to education, and no path to citizenship or resettlement, an entire generation of young Rohingya men have grown up with nothing. No future, no opportunities, no hope. And that vacuum is being filled by armed groups.
The Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army, known as ARSA, has been active since before the 2017 exodus, but their operations have expanded significantly. They're not the only group either. Multiple armed factions now operate in and around the camps, engaging in extortion, drug trafficking, and kidnapping. The methamphetamine trade flowing out of Myanmar's Shan state has found willing distributors among desperate camp populations. Human trafficking networks have embedded themselves in the camps. Women and girls are being trafficked to Malaysia and beyond.
And this is where the story intersects with broader Southeast Asian security. Bangladesh has been overwhelmed. The country took in nearly 1 million refugees, an extraordinary act of generosity for a nation that was already struggling with poverty and infrastructure challenges. But the international community's financial support has dried up. The UN's Joint Response Plan for the Rohingya crisis has been chronically underfunded, receiving barely half of what's needed. When you abandon 1 million people in camps with no future, you create the conditions for exactly the kind of radicalization and criminal enterprise we're now seeing.
Southeast Asian governments have largely responded to the Rohingya crisis with a combination of indifference and hostility. Malaysia periodically turns away boats of Rohingya refugees. Thailand has pushed them back to sea. Indonesia has seen local communities physically blocking Rohingya from coming ashore. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, has treated Myanmar's internal crisis with its signature approach of non-interference, which in practice means doing nothing while atrocities continue.
The security implications here are profound. The Diplomat's analysis suggests that as militant and criminal networks consolidate into camps, they're establishing connections across borders. Weapons are flowing. Drug networks are expanding. And the risk of a major terrorist incident, one that could be used by regional governments to justify even harsher crackdowns on Rohingya populations, grows with each passing year.
And let's name the parties responsible. Myanmar's military, which now rules the country after a 2021 coup, bears primary responsibility for creating this crisis through systematic ethnic cleansing. But the international community, and specifically the wealthy nations that have the resources to fund proper refugee support and resettlement, bears responsibility for abandoning these people. When you spend billions on military hardware and can't find the funds to prevent a refugee crisis from becoming a security crisis, your priorities are the problem.
The Rohingya situation is a case study in what happens when the world looks away. You don't solve a refugee crisis by ignoring it. You make it worse. And the consequences won't stay contained in Bangladesh. They'll ripple across Southeast Asia in the form of instability, trafficking, and violence. The Diplomat is right to sound the alarm. The question is whether anyone with power is listening.
Now we pivot to a story that might seem lighter on the surface but reveals deep tensions in the auto industry's electric future. According to Electrek, Porsche is reportedly considering scrapping its electric versions of the 718 Boxster and Cayman sports cars. But here's the twist: while Porsche gets cold feet, Audi's CEO has told employees that their electric successor to the TT sports car is still very much on track.
Let's unpack why this matters. Porsche committed publicly to electrifying its lineup. The 718 electron volts was supposed to be a flagship product, proof that electric powertrains could deliver the kind of driving experience that Porsche is famous for. The original Boxster and Cayman are beloved by driving enthusiasts. They're mid-engine, perfectly balanced, and represent what many consider the purest expression of Porsche's engineering philosophy. Electrifying them was supposed to be a statement that the EV future wouldn't compromise performance.
So what happened? The short answer is that the economics aren't working out. Battery costs, while declining, are still high enough that building a relatively affordable electric sports car, the 718 starts around $60,000 in its current form, is a money-losing proposition. The weight of batteries fundamentally changes the driving dynamics that make these cars special. And Porsche's core customer base, wealthy enthusiasts, has been lukewarm at best on the idea of giving up the engine sound and visceral experience that defines the brand.
But here's what makes this story more than just automotive industry gossip. Porsche is owned by Volkswagen Group, and Volkswagen has been one of the most aggressive legacy automakers in committing to electrification. They've invested tens of billions of euros. They launched an entire sub-brand, ID, dedicated to EVs. And now, across the group, we're seeing a quiet retreat. Production targets are being lowered. Timelines are being pushed back. And flagship EV projects like the Porsche 718 are potentially being cancelled outright.
Meanwhile, Audi, which sits under the same Volkswagen Group umbrella, is taking the opposite approach with the TT successor. Audi's CEO has reaffirmed commitment to an electric sports car, apparently betting that the brand can make it work where Porsche can't. This internal contradiction within the same corporate family tells you everything about the chaos in the legacy auto industry right now. Two brands, same parent company, same access to technology and platforms, reaching completely opposite conclusions about the viability of electric sports cars.
And the broader context here is critical. The global EV market is at an inflection point. Chinese manufacturers like BYD are producing compelling electric vehicles at price points that European and American brands can't match. Tesla continues to dominate the premium segment. Legacy automakers are caught in a brutal squeeze. They need to invest in electrification to remain relevant, but every dollar spent on EVs cannibalizes their profitable internal combustion business. It's the classic innovator's dilemma, and Porsche's potential retreat on the 718 is a symptom.
What concerns me is the narrative that's being constructed around these decisions. When Porsche potentially kills an EV sports car, the framing is about consumer choice and market demand. But the reality is that these companies spent decades lobbying against emissions regulations, investing minimally in EV technology, and protecting their combustion engine profits. Now that they're behind, they're using their own lack of preparation as evidence that the market isn't ready. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You underinvest in EVs, produce underwhelming products, and then point to weak sales as proof that consumers don't want them.
Audi's decision to push forward is the counterargument. They're betting that if you build a genuinely compelling electric sports car, one that leverages the unique advantages of electric powertrains like instant torque and a low center of gravity, the market will respond. It's the same bet Tesla made with the original Roadster 15 years ago. And whether Audi succeeds or fails, at least they're in the arena.
The stakes extend beyond any single car company. The transportation sector is the largest source of carbon emissions in many countries. The transition to electric vehicles is not optional if we're serious about climate targets. When major manufacturers waver on their EV commitments, it sends a signal to consumers, investors, and policymakers that the transition might not happen. And that signal has real consequences for climate policy and infrastructure investment decisions happening right now.
Watch what they do, not what they say. Porsche says it's committed to electrification. But if they cancel the 718 electron volts, that commitment rings hollow. The question for consumers and regulators is simple: are these companies serious about the electric future, or are they buying time to extract every last dollar from the internal combustion era?
And that question leads us perfectly into our final story tonight, because if anyone is putting real money where their mouth is on the electric and autonomous future, it's Uber. CleanTechnica is reporting that Uber is investing $100 million into EV charging infrastructure specifically designed for Robotaxis. And the history behind this move is fascinating.
Let me take you back to 2015. Travis Kalanick, Uber's founder and CEO at the time, made a bold public statement that Uber would buy every Robotaxi Tesla could produce by 2020, an estimated 500,000 vehicles. Then Elon Musk decided he'd rather operate his own Robotaxi fleet through Tesla, and that partnership evaporated. Fast forward to today, and the Robotaxi landscape looks completely different from what anyone predicted a decade ago.
Uber has since partnered with Waymo, the Alphabet-owned self-driving company, and other autonomous vehicle developers. They've effectively positioned themselves as the platform layer, the app you use to hail a Robotaxi, regardless of who manufactured the vehicle or developed the self-driving software. It's a smart strategic pivot. Instead of building the cars or the AI, Uber wants to be the marketplace. And now, with this $100 million charging investment, they're adding infrastructure to that platform play.
The charging investment is specifically targeted at the unique needs of autonomous vehicles. A human driver can pull into any charging station, plug in, and wait. A robotaxi needs infrastructure that accommodates vehicles without human occupants, automated charging systems, depots designed for fleet operations, and strategic placement that maximizes vehicle uptime. Uber is essentially building the gas stations of the autonomous future, and that's a powerful infrastructure moat.
But let's examine this critically. Uber has never turned a consistent profit from its core ride-hailing business. The company has historically subsidized rides with investor capital to gain market share, crushing traditional taxi industries in the process while classifying drivers as independent contractors to avoid the costs of employment. Now they're positioning for a future where those drivers are eliminated entirely. The $100 million charging investment isn't just about infrastructure, it's about building toward a business model where the most expensive and unpredictable element of ride-hailing, the human driver, is removed from the equation.
And that's a future with enormous labor implications. Uber currently has millions of drivers worldwide. Many of them are immigrants, people in developing economies, workers without other options. When Uber talks about Robotaxis, they're talking about a future where those jobs don't exist. The company that fought tooth and nail against classifying drivers as employees is now investing to eliminate those drivers entirely. There's a brutal logic to it, and we should be clear-eyed about what it means.
The $100 million also needs to be seen in the context of Uber's broader autonomous vehicle partnerships. They've signed agreements with Waymo for deployment in select cities, and they're working with other AV companies to expand the robotaxi offerings on their platform. Each of these partnerships is essentially a trial run for a driverless future. And the charging infrastructure investment signals that Uber is moving from experimental partnerships to permanent infrastructure, from testing the concept to building the foundation for scale.
There's also a competitive dimension here. Tesla has been promising its own robotaxi service for years. If Musk ever delivers on that vision, Tesla would be both the manufacturer, the software provider, and the platform, a fully vertically integrated competitor. Uber's strategy appears to be getting the infrastructure and partnerships in place before Tesla can execute, creating switching costs and network effects that would be difficult to overcome even for a company with Tesla's resources.
And we should note the irony of the Uber-Tesla dynamic. Kalanick wanted to buy Tesla's Robotaxis. Musk said no, I'll compete with you. Now Uber is partnering with Waymo, investing in infrastructure, and potentially building the dominant robotaxi platform while Tesla's autonomous driving timeline continues to slip. The $100 million charging investment is, in some ways, Uber's answer to Musk's rejection a decade ago, building around Tesla rather than through it.
The question for cities and regulators is whether they're ready for what Uber is building. Robotaxi deployment raises questions about safety, liability, labor displacement, urban planning, and the concentration of transportation infrastructure in the hands of a few tech companies. $100 million in charging infrastructure is a down payment on reshaping how cities move. That's a decision that shouldn't be made by corporate boardrooms alone.
Now let's step back and connect these four stories, because the pattern is unmistakable once you see it.
In every story we covered tonight, the same dynamic is at play. Corporations engineer systems that maximize their control over consumers, workers, and markets. Blind box companies use variable reinforcement to make buying addictive. Auto manufacturers manipulate their EV timelines to protect combustion engine profits. Uber invests in infrastructure that will eliminate millions of jobs while concentrating transportation power in its platform. And meanwhile, 1 million Rohingya refugees languish in camps because no government or corporation sees profit in solving their crisis.
The thread connecting Singapore's blind box regulation to Uber's robotaxi charging investment is this: in both cases, technology and corporate strategy are outpacing the ability of governments and societies to respond. Singapore is one of the few places actually trying to get ahead of the curve on consumer protection. Most governments are still playing catch-up, writing rules for the last crisis while the next one is already being engineered in corporate R&D labs.
And the Rohingya story is the starkest reminder of what happens when there's no profit motive to drive action. The blind box industry gets regulated because it's visible, it affects consumers in a wealthy city-state, and there's political will to act. The Rohingya crisis festers because refugees don't have purchasing power, refugee camps don't generate shareholder returns, and the countries with the most resources have decided it's not their problem.
The auto industry story reveals how corporate commitment to social goods like emissions reduction evaporates the moment it threatens the bottom line. Porsche will market sustainability in its advertising while potentially killing its most accessible EV. The gap between corporate rhetoric and corporate action has never been wider, and consumers need to understand that when a company says it's committed to the future, What it really means is that it's committed to the future as long as the future is profitable.
What we're seeing across all four stories is a world where the most powerful institutions, multinational corporations, tech platforms, industry conglomerates, are making decisions that will reshape how we consume, how we work, how we move through cities, and which human crises get attention. And they're making those decisions based on one metric: return on investment. That's not conspiracy. That's just capitalism doing exactly what it's designed to do. The question is whether the rest of us are going to let those decisions go unchallenged.
And that's what journalism is for. Not to tell you what to think, but to show you who's making the decisions, what they stand to gain, and what the rest of us stand to lose. Tonight's stories span 4 countries, 3 continents, and billions of dollars in corporate investment. But they all come down to the same question: who has power, and are they using it responsibly?
That's our show for tonight. I'm Alex Truth. Do your own research. Read the sources we cited. The South China Morning Post, the Diplomat, Electrek, CleanTechnica, these outlets are doing important work. Follow the money, follow the incentives, and never take a corporate press release at face value.
I'm Maya Clarity. Remember, the stories that matter most are often the ones that nobody's paying you to care about. 1 million Rohingya refugees shouldn't have to compete with blind boxes and sports cars for your attention, but in a world driven by clicks and profits, they do. Don't let the algorithm decide what matters. You decide.
Until next time, stay informed, stay skeptical, and keep demanding the truth.